Cybersecurity is being recognized now as part of national security, as part of international security.
Again, I mean, if you can replace teacher with AI or like current technology, then you probably don't have very good teachers.
We have to actually fundamentally change the way we're teaching computer science and build in how to code responsibly.
JCPOA was sold that it will actually enable Iran's more moderate within the regime. There was a lot of naivete about that, and we're paying the price.
Groups that are not accepted in the offline space often do try to find their niche, whatever that might be, in the online space.
The richest relation that is happening right now is between the EU and the countries in the Western Balkans.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Patrick Tucker.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around. I'm Patrick Tucker, technology editor for Defense One and author of the book, The Naked Future. And this session is Competition versus Cooperation, Stakes in the AI Race. And we have an incredible and very talented group of experts here to talk about this issue with us, laying out a variety of positive futures for the most important technology of the 21st century, which is artificial intelligence. So we want you to be involved as well. We are live on Facebook, and you can also send us questions and participate in our polling, slido.com, #GLOBSEC2018. So with that, let me first welcome to the stage our panelists. We have Shi-Yun Leong, Director of AI Technology at AI Singapore, Marique Rosa, CEO and CTO of Good AI in Prague, and Denit Gal, the Project Assistant Professor for Global Research at Keio University. Okay. Now, before we get started, we have a brief introductory video to help frame our question today. Let's roll that. Okay. Goodness, I always feel like I'm watching Ride of the Valkyries or something when, you know, all of these like promo videos for artificial intelligence. It's a terribly exciting time to be talking about this technology because there's so much speculation, there's so much excitement, there's so much interest, and there's the actual futures creation space is still very wide open. So first, I want to put this to everybody, a general question. And we'll have a poll up in a few seconds that you all can participate in. Okay, and here it is. A few days ago, we had a different session where we had different members of the national security and military community, retired General John Allen, General Mercier from NATO, and retired Lieutenant General Howard Bromberg. And the discussion there was about artificial intelligence and national security. And I asked a question that I'd like to repeat for this crowd to get your sense of how our responses to this question might change as we get different inputs from different folks that occupy different fields of this sector. The question was this: 20 years from now, advances in artificial intelligence will make the world more secure. So when we finally finished that poll the other day, we began it with a slim majority thinking that artificial intelligence was going to make the world less secure. And by the time we finished the panel, we ended with a larger majority thinking that artificial intelligence was going to make the world less secure in 20 years. And these folks have a completely different set of perspectives, a far more international frame to think about this question. So I want to again ask you to go to slido.com, #GLOBSEC 2018, participate in this poll. And we're going to see again how our responses evolve over the course of this conversation as we get some different points of view. And I'll bring this question also to you to begin, starting with you, Marek. In 20 years, as a result of the trends you're seeing in artificial intelligence, will artificial intelligence make the world a more secure place or a less secure place? Because I think your definition of security might be very different from the military types.
I think it will be more secure, but we need to make sure we need to make it happen. So there can be areas, for example, in crime fighting and so on, where I think more AI can help. You know, cameras that can detect some suspicious activities or find the criminals and so on. And on the higher level, politics and militaries, it could add some tension, or it could create even more arms race powered by AI tensions. But again, I think it depends on where we start. And for example, if we avoid doing autonomous lethal weapons, you know, AI that actually kills people, or that's optimized for killing people instead of just destroying the other weapons, then we can end up in less secure world. But if we go in a route where we know that we don't need to be developing weapons that target more people, actually we can develop weapons that, let's say, target other weapons, then I think we can end up in more secure world.
So this is a very important area of debate, especially within the engineering community as well, as they look for different opportunities for funding and things like this. But I want to think first about what the definition of security is, and open that up to include areas of sustainability, environmental resource availability, education. Dr. Leong, you just a few days ago attended a UN summit on using artificial intelligence to meet UN sustainability goals. And I think our definition of security must include sustainability. Can you tell us some of the outcomes of that discussion? What were the most important points reached?
Yes, I think artificial intelligence is seen to be a very disruptive, enabling technology that will actually change many different aspects of our lives. And the researchers and the technologists and also realize that as a technology itself, it will not be able to solve all the problems that is facing mankind and challenges. So recently, there is a trend and also the movement to actually have more dialogues and to actually look at the world, what are the challenges that's facing the world. And there's this movement on AI for good. How can we actually harness the power of AI technology to do the best things for mankind? And then the recent initiative by the United Nations in actually creating the forum for engagement and discussions on how can we harness the power of AI to try to address and solve the sustainable development goals. So the gathering of the technologists, of the policymakers, the governments, and the users to come together. And there were a few areas that they were looking at for this recent summit is on how can we use AI to help solve the problems in health. More than 1 billion people do not have access to basic health care. And can AI help in that area? And there's also a theme on AI for smart cities. How can we improve the city conditions and development so that in terms of transportation and housing and to make resources easily accessible and available for everybody. And there's also a track on how do we harness the satellite images, the big data, to help solve problems in agriculture, in, say, forestation, and addressing some environmental problems and preventing pandemics in disease spread. And also there was a track in trustworthy AI. Well, we actually are employing and using AI technologies and to help in various areas in our lives. How can we make sure that the systems and humans can work together to solve these problems, and how can we actually trust the AI systems that we build in a lot of critical decisions and a lot of critical situations where life and death and create important social and economic impact.
Okay, so when I increasingly find that when you talk about international discussions around AI and you involve folks that are involved in militaries and things like this, the discussion turns very quickly to great power competition and large economic nation states rubbing against each other in a way that is somewhat antagonistic. When during this forum, were you surprised by the willingness of players that on the military side are somewhat antagonistic to talk about collaborations around these more altruistic venues? Did that level of interest in participating surprise you at all?
Well, I wouldn't say it's surprising because it's definitely, there are, the world is connected. And we live in a world that we actually need to rely on each other's, the trade, the knowledge to work together. Because, for example, for countries with with fewer resources, and even Singapore in a small country, we realize that these technologies, the disruptive technologies, AI, will be a strong engine for economic and social growth, to help fulfill our Smart Nation initiative. And for example, even the recent report from Essential would think that AI applications could help double the growth rate, economic growth rate for Singapore by 2035, and also to make the gross value add to reach $200 billion US. And it will actually create a very good opportunity for people to live better and healthier and a safer life. I think it applies to many different countries as well. Mm-hmm. So, and how do we actually harness this power? We will not be able to do it ourselves. We need to collaborate and cooperate with the international community to reach that goal.
Okay, so you bring up the point of disruption. I think it's an absolutely vital one in this discussion, because the difference between a technology that creates at an exponential rate new opportunity and one that is disruptive is very much the question of whether or not you're approaching that question from the perspective of the incumbent, from the developed, already existing, very powerful state or economy that has potential to lose through next generation technologies, to lose position, to lose market share, et cetera, or if you're approaching that question from the startup economy, from the smaller country that has the opportunity to harness innovation and leapfrog over it. Only incumbents are disrupted. And we forget this a lot in our discussion about disruptive technology, is that there's a plurality of different ways to approach that question. So I'd like to turn to you, Danette. When you look at a variety of different economies around the world, some of them more eager to embrace this technology, some of them more likely to be disrupted. Where do you see the greatest potential for disruption in artificial intelligence in the next 20 years? In what country and in what context?
I think that a lot of countries have obviously a lot to gain from technology, but if I take that back to the question about being secure in 20 years, I think that would provide a good context for this answer. I'm going to give you a very typical Israeli answer. I'm going to say yes and no. Yes, it's going to be more secure because obviously we have abundance of data and we have very powerful algorithms that can process and kind of encapsulate a lot more information that we can. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's a very valuable resource. I'm going to say no because making a lot of these decisions, even in healthcare and in smart systems, means relinquishing some of your moral agency to a system that decides what is wrong and what is right, that is binary. There is 0 and there is 1. And in real life, we have a lot of other decisions that are between. There's a lot of numbers between 0 and 1. There's a huge gray zone where humans can make that decision. So if you relinquish that moral agency for cars driving, for robots operating, then you're going to be faced with a backlash where decisions are not always right, and they're not always right for the situation. And there you get to the point where AI is a very amazing resource that can help create more security and more benefit, but you're actually not sure if you're using it right.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I think that that is potentially the most disruptive application of AI, because we're seeing a lot of countries like the US, like China, like Japan, like Singapore, like the EU, like the UK, invest a lot of money into enhancing their AI capabilities and automating a lot of human functions.
Mm-hmm.
And that has obviously tremendous implications in terms of disrupting society itself, the way that it conducts itself, the economy,
Mm-hmm.
education, a lot of things that are fundamental to the way we live.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is automation, with all its amazing financial and kind of economic benefit, is it necessarily the stuff that we need? Is it necessarily what is right for society and how we're going to develop going forward? So I think that AI is perhaps most disruptive to society as opposed to the economy, and I think that competition is a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the more countries we have, the more resources, the more abilities, the more talent, all the better.
Right.
But we need to make sure that we actually think about it not just in economic terms of kind of saying this is going to be disruptive, because disruptive technology is a niche that comes into the center, becomes mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of other repercussions that we should consider.
Right, right. So among some of the potential repercussions of artificial intelligence disrupting societies and economies in the next few years, I always go to self-driving cars because there's this big area of application in self-driving cars that gets sort of overlooked. If you talk to Sebastian Thrun, who's the Stanford roboticist, originally from Carnegie Mellon, originally from Germany, who developed the self-driving car first for the military as part of the DARPA Grand Challenge and then for Google, and you talk about his vision for what these things are going to do, he sees a perfect concert, harmonized self-driving cars all working together, negotiating traffic to essentially eliminate traffic. They don't need parking because they can park miles away. They work with every other piece of data that you create to go to where you are, anticipating your need for a self-driving car, which eliminates essentially urban parking, creating huge opportunities to redesign urban centers. But it also gets rid of parking tickets. In the United States, parking tickets are how we fund schools. So I'd like to put this question to you, Dr. Leong. When you look at economies, and particularly Singapore, as a country that is anticipating and moving forward very aggressively and ambitiously with adopting and funding new technologies, how do you do that? What are the most important things that you look at in terms of making sure that the technologies that you're embracing don't cause, at some point, unintended consequences, either for municipal workers or players, or just for anybody else?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I would like to take the viewpoint that maybe calling AI disrupting technology is a disruptive technology is probably not as good as the name of it's going to be transformative technology. When we're looking at applying AI techniques in applications, we are actually striving towards building human-centric systems. It's not just automation alone, but is building systems that will work with, work for, and work alongside human beings to solve some of the problems, to address some of the challenges. For example, in Singapore, we have a rapidly aging society. Having autonomous cars is not just we want to get ahead in the technology race, which we probably not in the position to do that, but it's also to actually solve some of the urban transportation problems and reduce pollution and we have a very small place. And for the aged population, how do we get to the last mile transportation for them to get from one place to the other? So in terms of how do we actually harness this power of AI and to actually to reach the goal of building social and economic progress and also the objectives, Singapore has a plan, a strategic plan, and it has been recognized as an engine for social economic growth. Recently, the government, the National Research Foundation, has set up a national program called AI Singapore, where I'm working in. We are actually aiming to create an ecosystem where we bring together the talent, the technology, and to create a framework and test bed to bring research, the deep capabilities, and translate it into industry innovation. So we are actually bringing together the academia, the companies, the startups, to try to co-create innovations in different areas. We are supporting fundamental research on future technologies. We are trying to improve the capabilities of the industry to make use of these technologies by providing forums and projects for the academia and the companies to work together. And we are also identifying grand challenges in the society where these are actual problems to solve and they will create a social economic impact. And for example, we are going to launch a grand challenge and get everybody to work together in AI in health.
Okay. Wow. So this is an important point. AI Singapore taking a broad strategic plan, one that's society-wide. In the U.S., we're also developing a new AI research center. It's within the United States military. So that's an interesting contrast. You've one taking an approach that is society-wide, and from the perspective of the United States, probably putting in more money net, like overall, but specific to one portion of human activity and governance, and that's the military. So to you, Danette, when you look at different countries that have made different announcements about developing AI strategies, looking out 10 years. Who's doing it right? Who's doing it in a way that you feel is a good model? And then we're going to get to China, which I think occupies both of those spots a little bit.
I think that in terms of strategic development, we're starting to see a lot of very different approaches. I think that a very interesting contrast to look at just within East Asia, for example, is China and Japan. So Singapore obviously kind of has the whole picture. So they are doing it right. I don't have anything to add. I'm a big fan of AI Singapore. I think that if you kind of look at the different perspectives, you see a very strong strategic planning in China that has a civ-mil collaboration, very strong emphasis on kind of public opinion about robust industry. And then if you look at Japan, Japan has a lot of planning on the societal level. They have this vision called Society 5.0 that actually envisions the future of society with robots. They have a strategic roadmap, they have an educational research roadmap, but they put a very strong emphasis on creating a new society. That I think is something that is unique and we're not seeing so far. If you think back to the white papers that came out under the Obama administration, you see a lot of willingness to think about AI, to kind of come up with a map, with a strategy. A lot of people say that the Chinese plan was actually influenced by the American one. And they were just saying, you know, they have all these great plans, they kind of put all this great infrastructure, but we're not seeing a plan. How about we take that infrastructure and we turn it into a plan for ourselves? And obviously, it's very distinct with Chinese characteristics. But I think that there is a lot of overlap between the different planning. And I think that a lot of countries are actually in conversation with each other in terms of policy, because you tend to see a lot of shared interests and shared concerns. Super aging society, smart city and the need for smart infrastructure, even civ-mil collaboration is obviously very important to a lot of countries. So in that sense, you tend to see a lot of common denominators within the policy. I think that everyone has their own unique emphasis according to the state of the country and its needs. And that is the way it should be, because we should not be kind of one size fits all.
Okay, let me turn to you, Marique. Because you're involved in the development of AI specifically for good, and there is this hunger on behalf of people in governments to develop strategies for how to best organize their society around the coming shift in artificial intelligence, to use it for good, and to offset its bad aspects or its disruptive aspects. What should be in any nation's AI strategy from the perspective of developing AI?
Yeah, this is a good question. And I think what I see, the strategies and the plans of various countries that announce their strategies, I think they are more or less doing it correct. And So big part is thinking about how AI and other technologies will impact jobs and also the people in the country, and especially the people who will not be able to adapt to these changes. Because these changes, they will be, or these cycles of adaptation will be shortening and so on. So actually addressing this question, what to do, or what should the people who cannot adapt to this changing future, that's probably the main thing. Second is some kind of regulation to AI, making sure that people understand what the AI is capable, what it is doing, what it is not doing, where is it failing, where we actually cannot use it yet. This is another thing, and to really enforce it on the companies, make sure that the companies are presenting the AI in the right way, not overhyping and so on, but actually in the right way, and so that people understand what the AI can do and will not misuse it and so on.
Okay.
So I would say these things.
So I want to remind everybody that we have a poll that you can participate in. If you go into GLOBSEC 2018, you can participate in the poll. If you voted one way earlier, I'm told you can actually change your vote. So I encourage that, because in the United States, that's only semi-legal. And also to send questions, and we're going to start trying to incorporate them a little bit into our program here. But a moment ago, we talked about grand strategic national visions for artificial intelligence, and we made brief reference to China. And so I want to go to you, Danette. China has put forward an enormously important artificial intelligence strategy document outlining its ambitions in this space. And bottom line, by the year 2030, they want to be the global powerhouse for artificial intelligence innovation. This is like their strategic objective plan. And when you talk to folks from Silicon Valley, Eric Schmidt in particular, who is the former CEO of Google Alphabet, they talk about the strategic plan as a wake-up call to Washington. We're falling behind, we're not paying attention. What's the best way to think about the Chinese strategic plan to become the AI innovation powerhouse mecca by the year 2030 or so, I think? Is it a call to a type of arms race? Is it a call to move research and development money and startup money to China and start your business there? What's the best way to think about that plan from our perspective, Danette?
I think that obviously the plan is very ambitious. It's almost sort of a wish list of the things that we would like to see happen by 2030. And they have 3 distinct stages that are somewhat specific in the goals that they would like to achieve, but also very, very vague. And that leaves a lot of room for development. And I think that the perception of having it as almost like a wake-up call is, I think, a very positive thing. Because we are at the point that until now, the US was obviously a very strong and leading force in science and technology. And I think that we got a little too comfortable with that, where a lot of the talent and a lot of the money is kind of concentrated in one country. And I think that having the emerging alternative is something that is very positive for us. And the fact that the US says, oh, wow, China is investing so much money, maybe we should step up our game. That competition is good. And I would like to see more people participating in that competition. Singapore, the EU, other countries that are kind of stepping up and saying, you know what, clearly there's something interesting happening here. So the idea of looking at it as a kind of a wake-up call is a positive thing in my idea, because it generates positive competition. I'm also obviously aware of its negative implications in the sense that it perhaps fosters a race, where basically you say, okay, if they take a step forward, we must take 2. And then 3, and then 4, and that kind of starts exacerbating. So in that sense, I'm concerned. I think that China has been leading for that kind of scientific and technological leadership for a while. It's not something new. They kind of missed on the opportunity to shape what the internet would look like, and they only had to integrate the technology later on. Obviously, they've mastered it, and they're fantastic at it, but that took them a good couple of years to kind of catch up. And I think that they see that as a disadvantage, and they want to make sure that when the next technological revolution comes along, if we're talking about AI, if we're talking about quantum, a lot of other technologies, they want to be there in the heart of it, shaping it. And I think that the fact that an actor like China comes in and we're kind of starting to move away from just one power is concerning if we stay with 2 powers, because we stay in a bipolar world and nothing really changes. But it could also be a very strong opportunity for countries to say, interesting. There is obviously some ambition happening. There is obviously strategic planning happening around the world. Maybe we should also do that. Maybe we should also participate. So I think that it could obviously be seen as negative as positive. I think that, yes, it's an intimidating program in the sense that it is so ambitious. China is putting in so many resources. But in a way, I think that it's also a very positive wake-up call for people to participate and join and step up.
So there's some important distinctions in the way China as a government works with the private sector to fund and develop emerging technologies, distinct from the way the United States was. For instance, China, in the way they fund Baidu, which is kind of the Google competitor, in many ways this is seen as a model, potentially, for the way the government and the private sector can work together to fund enormous and important emerging technology ambitions. It's very distinct from the way the US government would work with a company like Google, which is to say not really at all. So is the model of China and Baidu, is that one that should be emulated, or is it more of a cautionary tale? And I'll throw that to anybody.
I'm happy to take
yes.
a poke at it.
Sure.
I think that it is definitely distinct in the sense that the US has a very strong industrial layer that is able to kind of spur a lot of innovation and research. And in the sense that you don't have that in other countries, you will need to have some support. AI, throughout its boom-bust cycle and throughout its history, basically lacked two fundamental things. One is funding, the second is computing power. Funding and computing power comes to resources. They come to money. Money don't grow on trees. If you want to have engineers that are working, if you want to have training, if you want to have capabilities and tools, you're going to have to invest in it. So in that sense, we will need to have one of two layers that are strong and robust enough to support these resources. One would be the industry, one would be the government. I think that in the US, we're seeing the government kind of lagging behind the industry, where the industry is very, very strong and kind of pushes and propels innovation. And then in China, we're seeing kind of a very strong convergence between the government and the industry, where the government basically comes and says, this is a strategic objective, this is what we're going to go for. And then companies kind of follow in line. Is it a cautionary tale? Yes, because it directs innovation in a very certain path. And it also stifles it to some extent. If you have a plan and you say, now everyone jumps, then no one runs. Right. Or no one, circles. And there are a lot of other things that you could have done that would have led to better consequences just because the market perhaps knows better in that sense. So I think that it is a cautionary tale in the sense that it could stifle innovation, but it's also a pretty interesting example of how you could have that kind of alignment where you would have double the support. So not just the industry or the government, the two working together and actually really propelling the industry.
Right. So that sort of alignment, as mentioned, doesn't exist in the same way in the United States. There's been some movement in that direction, and some employees at mainstream technology companies have been incredibly resistant to it. For instance, just this week, a bunch of Google engineers actually resigned after initially 3,100 wrote a letter in protest to Google management saying that they wanted no part in a company that was partnering with the United States military on a very specific AI-related problem, which is a pilot project called Project Maven. That we can't even begin to describe how alignment between Silicon Valley and the government can happen, but there's some magnetism, there's some polarity there. Originally, after that letter from 3,100 Google engineers was made public, Google had a big closed-door meeting with a whole bunch of folks, with a whole bunch of people inside Google, and they announced, my outlet broke this story, they announced that they were going to draft a set of principles that would guide the company in its future relationships with the United States military or with governments. So they could stick to their ethical principles and still do work with the military after they created these principles. That was the idea. So I want to turn to you, Marique, because this list of principles, as soon as it comes out, everybody in the tech press is going to leap all over them as being incredibly important, but they're still being formed right now. When you look at the potential of governments and of militaries to contribute meaningful funding to work that is benign or altruistic in nature, but still comes from the government, what should be part of a list of principles for AI companies doing work with governments and with militaries?
So I think the companies in their values should have strict guidelines for, like what are the boundaries where they want to go and where they don't want to go. So there can be companies, and there will be companies that will use AI for whatever someone will pay them, or fund them. There will be companies that will have some limits and will say like, okay, we can go to defense, for example, but only up to this point. Like we will really work only on defense technologies, not on the killing technologies and so on. And we already had this discussion in my company. It wasn't really directed towards the military and these things. It was more towards what if we will have a client, a good paying client with a lot of money, but like some cheeky objective, like are we going to help him and so on. So on this meeting we also decided no, but it's very subjective in these things. So it's really hard to say like how what challenges there will be on our value system. That's one thing, and another is there can be also some kind of maybe we will not have a consensus even within our company on where to go, where not to go, because I can see, for example, me personally, I would do some defense AI things, but I would avoid some area of AI in defense. And for some people in the company, even where I will be willing to go, may be uncomfortable for them. And for some people, not just in our company, but in general, I think for some people it can be some value system way of think, like they have some beliefs and they just don't want to do, or they just don't want to deal with certain kind of people. And for some people it can be a PR issue, like they don't want to be attached to some kind of, like people or area or something like this. So for me, and I'm kind of like setting the values and the culture in our company. For me, what is important is that if it will be helping people or not helping people, like, think about this. And then that's the like final objective and how we can get there.
So I'm curious, and I understand that you can't necessarily represent the entire AI engineering and development community, but I'm curious about how robust this debate is within that community. Did a lot of people look at that letter of protest from Google engineers, and were they supportive of it? Were they dismissive of it? Does the AI community have a monolithic internationally, a monolithic cultural frame, or not as much?
I don't think it's monolithic. I think there are differences between people, but there is a lot of discussion on this topic. So what is actually positive in the recent years is that a couple years ago, engineers or researchers, they would say like, I'm developing these algorithms, I don't care how they are going to be used. And this is actually changing. Like there are people who are thinking about how their algorithms, their technology, their research can be used, how it will be used, and they want to have impact on what values will be inside these algorithms. So I think this is positive. And again, it's not monolithic, and I don't think it ever will be monolithic, but at least there is this shift in perception of the technology people, on looking how what will be the impacts of their work, their algorithms, and so on.
Okay, so you might describe it as sort of a broad understanding that's growing of the consequentiality of work,
yes,
but not necessarily a monolithic frame. That makes a lot of sense. And it also brings us, when we talk about consequentiality in artificial intelligence, I think we have to return to this question of trust, because that's really key to certainly the Defense Department in its decisions about acquiring artificial intelligence. And I know across different sectors of business, the question of using AI as an advice support aid, where you're going to a big neural network, it's outputting to you a suggestion. It might be a suggestion about where to go. It might be a suggestion about how to make a logistics decision. But it's based on a process, at least in today's neural networking, that is fairly opaque. It is a process that's largely not transparent to the managers. There's different sectors of the economy that are more comfortable with that opaqueness. If you're doing high-velocity stock trades, if you're making money over loss, you're more comfortable with it. If you're a civil manager, you're not comfortable with it because you have to explain your decision to voters, and it doesn't give you that opportunity. How do we build greater trust and credibility in the outputs of neural networking systems that we're rushing to embrace? Yes.
If I may try to answer that question. I think that trust is at different levels. For example, we're looking at the software systems or a large distributed systems. One is at the technology level, where in computer science, when we build algorithms and we look to processes of verification, validation, and making sure that it is indeed computing the right thing given the right types of input and output. At the next level would be when you're putting in the components and build a system. Is the design process, are there any safeguards to make sure that the components are connected correctly and the inputs and outputs do not go wrong or to give you unexpected or erroneous output? There is a second level. And the third level is that when you're designing the whole system, what is its intention of use, how is it going to be used, how is it going to interact with other systems, and how is it going to interact with other people who are using it. And there's another level of design principles that we have to put into. It is still an evolving field. I think the community, the research community, the engineering community, and also the user community are still trying to develop the set of guidelines and process. There is no fixed way of doing that, but there's awareness of this problem, and we realize that when we're going to use the system, all these things have to be clarified and clearly defined, and then there's the way towards building trustworthy system. And of course, another aspect is the data that we're going to use to train some of these artificial intelligence systems as well.
Yeah, so I have this terrible fear that as soon as folks within the public sector, government managers, begin to embrace neural networking, the first thing that they'll do is defend the process by which that neural network, outputted its decision. They're going to defend their data set and that regression model as absolutely perfect and, publicly accountable. And I wonder if there's a danger there. You, Danette, had a very good point the other day in a different session on algorithmic bias and the potential for corrupting data sets and thus corrupting the outputs of tomorrow's great AI engines. What mechanisms should we begin to put in place to ameliorate or correct that beforehand? Is it enough to trust a government when it says, well, I promise you our data set is pristine and we've riddled out all algorithmic bias? What processes can we undertake now to make sure that we limit that as much as possible?
So I think that we could divide it into 3 steps. The first step is about trust. And I'm a very big proponent of trust, but my approach to achieving trust is through distrust. In the sense that you understand that things are not perfect. You understand that these are not necessarily things that you can trust. Even if the data is beautiful and clean, and even if the algorithm is cutting edge and you have all the capabilities, you cannot necessarily trust it to make the right decision. And I think that by understanding the limits of trust and distrusting the machine, you could actually work much better with it because you place more trust in yourself. And you place more trust in the design and you continually kind of question it and improve it. That's the one very critical factor. The second is that I'll take an example. I'm a part of the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. And we have a set of standards. We basically came together. There's a group of close to 1,000 experts working together and producing a lot of input and information, and we are starting to turn that into standards because we want to make sure that this is going to be a lasting impact, and IEEE is the largest professional technical association in the world, so it's a perfect platform to do that. There is a standard about how to clean your database, and it kind of consults experts around the world and asks them for biases and ask them for things that we cannot perceive. Because if you and I build a data set, we each have our own biases and we each have our own prejudice. And you can clean it to your best of your ability, and I can clean it to the best of my ability. But if we switch, I think that we will find that you and I still have biases. So in that sense, being able to create that kind of data set of biases allows you to actually clean the data and account for a lot of other biases. So knowledge sharing in that sense is critical. And I think that third is really the willingness to be humble about this, the willingness to understand and to admit that this is an early stage technology that will only get better if we use it and if we train it. And there are going to be problems, there are going to be mistakes, there are going to be accidents, and we need to accept that. That is not to say we should work very, very hard to make sure that we minimize them, but I think that we should also be very patient. It's almost like training a child. They're bound to fall, they're bound to make mistakes. We need to accept that and be humble about it and not have politicians standing by and saying, this is the perfect solution, or saying, you know what, we tried, we understand that we made mistakes, we're going to fix it so that next time it will work better.
Okay. I want to remind everybody, slido.com, GLOBSEC hashtag GLOBSEC 2018 to send us your questions. We already have a couple coming in. But before we move to those, I want to return to this question of convincing people to share data sets in order to riddle out algorithmic bias in artificial intelligence. If I were to go to the military now and I'm like, hey, would you like to share your data set on high-value targets with a few researchers from Yale University? They would be like, we're going to revoke your Pentagon pass and now you can get out of this building. How do we incentivize the sharing of data sets and tools across the broader community? I'd be interested in your perspective as a developer who works very hard to develop these, and also from a policy perspective, is this the sort of thing that it might make sense to fund at a governmental level so that you can buy down the risk of loss of IP, if it exists, to create a proper frame where people feel more licensed to share their tools and particularly share their data to riddle out this bias? So first, to Marek, what would incentivize you to share some of your most closely held data sets or even algorithmic tools and IP with a would-be competitor? Would you ever consider it? What would be the prospect?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to my mind is benchmarking, like benchmarking and some kind of competition contests. When you would want to compare your or your peers' solutions with someone else. So in this case, and again, it depends case by case, but it may be worth to share the data. Probably not as high profile as you mentioned, but something more normal. So benchmarking and competitions, I think, can help sharing the data.
Okay. Should this IEEE activity, should it be funded on a governmental level?
I think that governments should participate. I think that there needs to be a consensus on the rules, on the tools that we use. I think that there is a very important distinction to be made, because this is tools for you to manage your database. This is tools for you to make sure that it's clean, that it's robust, that it's, well, I can't say bias-free because we'll never know, but inching closer to that. I think that on the other hand, you have the kind of idea of sharing databases. And I would like to highlight the Chinese cybersecurity law here, which I think received a lot of negative media attention, but there are also some very positive sides to it in the sense that the government has access to the data. And it's for good and it's for bad. But what the good thing about this is that the government has access to the data. Companies have to store the data in a certain way, and the government is able to share that data with startups and with universities. And that really changed the picture in terms of research, in terms of innovation. And I think that once this is a commonly kind of accessed or owned resource, then that really changes things. Because obviously you wouldn't want to share your data with your competitor. Data is the most valuable resource. It's more valuable than gold. It's more valuable than oil. It's also an infinitely valuable resource because you can always extract more from data if you get creative about what you do with it. So in that sense, this is the kind of resource where we're getting to the point that it's so valuable that maybe it should be shared and maybe it should be owned by everyone. Because if you're going to have the data centralized in one place, you're not going to have any innovation. And I think that Singapore specifically really made a lot of interesting developments in that it brings out the entire ecosystem and kind of facilitates that sharing platform. And I think that is a very interesting model to look at.
Okay, so nothing incentivizes a crowd like at 9:54 on a Saturday, like a robust discussion of data integrity. I'm going to go to some questions from the audience now that I thought were fantastic and very important. One is the effects of quantum computing on our attitudes towards AI, since the output decisions won't be binary anymore. I've heard a lot of people talk about applications of quantum computing in realizing the dream of a general AI, an AI that operates in the same way that the human mind can approach a general set of problems. It's basically a way of thinking of that science fictional humanistic AI. What effect do you see of quantum computing on the future of artificial intelligence, Marik?
So for me, because I'm not expert on quantum computing, it's still like to discuss this is quite speculative, you know. And to be honest, I cannot say that much. But what I think is that in order to achieve general AI, I don't think we will need quantum computing. Maybe it will be useful, but whatever quantum computing will be, you know, because it's really very speculative and experimental field, and I don't really know what to take of it. And so I think we can, it's possible to do general AI even without quantum computing, and the computing power is there. I don't think only computing power is what we need for general AI. I think it's more about the algorithms. So, yeah.
Do you have a timeline? Because different AI researchers, their timeline for realizing this dream of general AI, it tends to vary tremendously, kind of depending on whether they do theorem proving and like hard math, in which case they see this like super intelligence emerging relatively quickly, versus roboticists who tend to see it thousands of years in the future because they mostly work with things that fall down a lot. So do you have an opinion on when the world will reach general AI, or when a company will?
I think it's like I cannot make any specific prediction. When we are thinking about this, it's more like what kind of horizon we, like in our company, want to focus on. And this also depends on how you start prioritizing your effort. Because if you say that we must have a general AI in 6 months, you start prioritizing in different way than if you will say we will have it in 100 years. Because first 100 years is so vague, you know, you don't even know what will happen in next 10 years. And it's almost like expecting that some magic will happen which will solve AGI and so on. So, but when you have like really specific and really short-term horizon, it forces you to prioritize differently and to also try to see things in more clear step, like more specific step, not these vague things like we need some new technology to solve it. It's like, what is the actual technology that we need to solve it, how it will work, and so on. So my answer to this question would be that I don't know exactly. I think it will be few decades probably, but it's also possible it will be much shorter if someone will find a trick how to basically automate the work of AI researchers. So then it will be AI developing AI and so on. And I think this can be a parallel process to current deep learning, and this research can leapfrog in maybe months. So there is a possibility it will be in a few years. There is also a possibility it's already here and we just don't see it. And but also it may take decades.
Okay, terrifying. Raise your hand if you have questions for our audience. We've got one right here. Yes.
Liu Shizhong from the Taiwan External Trade Development Council. I was in Singapore 2 months ago for the IoT Asia event, and I was struck by the speech made by the Singaporean Foreign Minister, Vivian Balakrishnan. Yes. Of course, he is a parliament member and he is political appointee, but what strikes me is that he is also an eye doctor and he's also wearing a hat as the nation's Smart Nation project. So he's no traditional diplomat. So my question is more about how to further incorporate AI or other innovation technology into doing some kind of new diplomacy. Now I know AI can do a lot of things: military, health, transportation, others. But in the case of Singapore, since you have a very different kind of foreign ministers, you have your national goal. In what way do you sort of incorporate those kind of innovation concept into the way that your government is doing your diplomacy?
Okay. Well, I think the AI applications in government is definitely also a focus area where we're going to developing our capabilities. In terms of diplomacy, for example, one of the main capabilities of artificial intelligence is able to process a lot of information and help understand the situation and then scenario. In terms of cognitive process information to understand situations that's developing in different countries, okay, and also perhaps to predict and based on historical facts and predict the development in different situations in different countries. And I think AI technologies can help in that sense. And of course, in terms of when we're talking about communications, AI technologies is making great leaps in natural language processing and translation. And I think those are the applications that could help as well. And I believe also in terms of talking about decision support, playing out the scenarios and the communications and the plans and the proposals of working between governments and for the policymakers. And I think AI technologies can help in that sense.
Other questions? Here we go, right here.
Thank you. Bonjour Hara, Senior Fellow in the Sasaga Peace Foundation, Japan. There was a news that the Chinese AI system and the Chinese Communist Party stopped the system and re-educate this system. That case issues gave us the many problems. So the answer cannot be accepted by the Chinese Communist Party, but that was the public opinion like that. We can re-educate the AI system, means we can control the learning of AI. And the answers is bad to the Communist Party, but not bad to the opinion public. So what is the neutral? We can guarantee the without bias the learning the AI. So each country has the each national interest. Then countries also have the intention to use the AI for its purpose. So I'd like to understand how to build the international standard without those kind of bias. Thank you.
Okay, I think how do you build international standards around AI when you have players as large and outsized in influence as China, which can't possibly neutralize bias in the way it approaches international affairs and standards erection?
Just to shed light on that particular occurrence, the chatbot is a Microsoft-operated chatbot in collaboration with Tencent called, I believe it was either Baby QQ, or no, it was Xiaobing. It was Little Ice. And it was asked what was the Chinese dream, and it was said to immigrate to America, which is obviously very funny. But then again, how would you feel if you asked in Slovakia what was the Slovakian dream, and they were like, to emigrate to the UK. It's not. I mean, I think that obviously it's a politically problematic answer, but it's also not a very nice one. I think that there is an interesting problem here because we're seeing a lot of the technology being imported from big players, and we're seeing that imported from the U.S. That has U.S. database and kind of has the immigrating to the U.S. is obviously a U.S. answer because you could immigrate anywhere else. And now immigration to the US is actually really hard. So you could actually do a lot of other things. But there is this importing of technology that comes from the US, and now we're starting to see a lot of importing of technology comes to China. And I think that that is a very critical question about how we're going to take technology that was not developed for us, it was developed for a specific market, was developed for specific cultural purposes, and we use that within our countries. Because some of our countries don't have the ability to create all these really robust systems. So I think that in the sense of standards, we should be able to do two things. One is establish a very robust basis, or kind of a nice kind of system for mutual language. So we can all agree that AI systems hurting people is not a good thing. And we could all agree that AI offending someone is not a good thing. And we could build on top of that. So we can say AI will not do harm. And then we actually specify the ways that it could do harm. And then, for example, if you don't want AI to culturally offend you, then you would have to go specifically to the market and understand what cultural offending in that market means. And then on top of that, you could build and kind of inject in the cultural perspectives, the language, the values. And I think that if we were to go in that approach, I think that our ability to use shared technology and agreed on these kind of very basic fundamental values would be exponentially better. So in that sense, you know, I think that there is the discourse of getting to shared ethics and shared values. And the problem is that a lot of these discussions don't reflect Asian tradition, it doesn't reflect African tradition, it doesn't reflect Latin tradition.
Right.
And we're going to get to the point where we're taking in technology that was not designed for us and does not match our cultural values. We're going to have to make sure that we have the capability to take technology that is receptive to our values and to our ethics so that we can imbue it with the ethical values that we deem important. So that is the kind of discussion that I aspire to see. And that is the kind of standard that I think would facilitate that.
Yeah. So it's so fascinating right now. Facebook, as a huge part of its business model moving forward, capturing new markets, spends a ton of time understanding cultural nuances within markets that it's going to try and move into. It's sort of like better than the State Department at this stuff now, and in many ways certainly better staffed. But this is an example of like how you get, you take something that is now a really important human activity at a top technology company, and then you apply AI to it, and you can see how difficult that actually is to automate certain things that today are still very much in the realm of the human. So additional questions? Yes, right here.
Hi, I actually asked the question to Slido, but I can probably phrase it
Sure, go ahead.
a bit better. I wanted to ask, you know, you are talking about, you know, the arms race in AI and US and so on, and even the kind of standard Mariana Mazzucato, you know, entrepreneurial states theory suggests that the involvement of state in this development of cutting-edge technologies is primarily through availability of large funding and to do things, you know, that individual companies may not have funding to do so. But what about small countries, small nations like Slovakia, for instance, that are not at the, you know, front edge of developing technology, that don't have access to that much data or haven't, you know, developed their capabilities and so on. What can we do here in order to not fall behind and not to die out soon in AI-led world? Thank you.
So that's an important point. We talk about these huge global players in AI, but the ultimate greatest potential of it is as a means for smaller players to leapfrog boundaries that today slow down incumbents. So which is the true story?
I think to be as close as possible to what the leaders in this technology race are doing, and maybe small countries or small companies have smaller chances of succeeding or being on the edge, but they still can be like behind just but little bit, you know, like really try to follow and so on, and maybe be better at some niches and so on. So I don't think it's a lost battle or lost cause, but even the smaller companies, smaller countries still need to try hard to follow or to maybe even lead in some niches.
Yeah, the niche identification, I think, is really critical here. If you live in Washington, D.C., you might have seen very recently these little robots that drive around on the street. They're about this big, and they're usually now guided by a person. It's from Estonia. It's an Estonian company that is going to deploy food delivery robots in Washington, D.C. by the end of this year. So that is a niche that they identified, that they invested in early. They had some government help, but they also have a lot of great private sector help and a lot of talent. They met that niche early, and they went after it. So that sounds like exactly what is your niche, identify that, and then, I don't know, put all your money on that spot on the roulette wheel, and that's your best shot, maybe. At the same time, if I knew anything about this, then I would be rich, and I'm not. So, right here.
Hi, Rada Dainak. I have a question. In about 2 years, there will be hardware platforms available which exceeds the speed and capacity of human brain, hardware platform. How long, Marek, do you expect when the software technology and AI algorithm will take advantage of that platform and create its system which has similar or higher capability than human brain?
Right, so it's that sort of when will AI surpass our ability to control AI type of question. And I don't know, it sounds like it's sort of related to the general AI question. Is this something that you are concerned with at all? Is this a realistic concern?
Well, of course, like if you want to create something that is more intelligent than you, then you need to make sure that it has your value system and will be propagating your value system. And this is a really similar question to the previous one regarding AGI, but maybe we can add one more thing to this, and it's that what kind of skills are we talking about, what kind of abilities, because there are AIs or other machines that are superhuman even today, like car is faster than a person and so on. But what they are missing is the generality or the universality and the adaptability to novel problems and so on. So I still don't think we have AI algorithms that are better at adapting to changing problems, changing environments, that are better than people. And definitely not in so many areas or such a wide areas of problems and so on. So I see this not as a hardware problem at this moment, but more like an algorithmic, like we are still missing the algorithms. But the thing is that with better hardware, we can find these algorithms, because we can maybe even automate the process of searching for these algorithms on better hardware.
Okay, I want to relate that to a question that showed up on Slido and take it and adapt it just a little bit. The question was, how is AI going to affect skill displacement? So if you've got artificially driving cars, does that mean we'll lose collectively as a group, like the ability to drive correctly? And I would invite you to visit Washington, D.C. sometime and realize that we have already lost the ability to drive correctly, like clearly. But I want to add to that a different frame too, because we are talking about some of the optimistic applications of AI. What danger does skill loss pose? But more importantly, what new skills is artificial intelligence going to help us cultivate and will demand from us? So
yeah, I mean, I'd like to take a poke at that, because I am on the camp of people that think that artificial intelligence is only coming into existence. We still don't have it. What we have right now is we have extended intelligence. We basically took human functions that any child could do, and we automated them. We gave them computing power, and now they're kind of on steroids. So in that sense, in terms of passing human abilities, long gone. What we did is we created this extended intelligence that is aimed to replace us. Why? Because it emulates the capabilities that human has and then does it better. So in that sense, we kind of created this very bitter pill for ourselves, where we created machines that could do better than us. It's kind of the epitome of Promethean shame, if you would. I think that this got to the point that now we kind of gave AI all of our skills, and we have machines that are very, very good at doing one thing. I have a machine that can pick up this glass, and I have a machine that could play chess. If you would ask the chess player to pick up this glass, it won't be able to. And if you could ask the machine that picks up the glass to play chess, it won't be able to. We're going to get to the point of networked intelligence, where machines are able to exchange and learn these skills based on kind of the download of neural nets. And that's when things are going to change. That's going to be a tipping point. But until then, we need to understand that we gave AI a lot of the skills that we have. But there are still a lot of skills that we have that AI can't. And that is the multidisciplinary way of thinking, more complex thinking. There are a lot of things that we still have that machines are not doing better than us. And I think that that is what we should be focusing on. Teaching kids to crunch numbers is useless. Clearly, they need to have the fundamental of mathematics, but at the end of the day, a calculator can do that better than you. In that sense, we're going to have to start thinking about, where does human intelligence become more competitive? It's almost like a market competition, but with intelligence. We're going to have to start thinking about what our edge is as humans, and how we can make sure that even though AI is better at us in some human skills, How can we still keep that kind of edge, keep that kind of control, keep that kind of creativity? And I think that that is what I am concerned about and I see lacking, because I see a lot of educational initiatives investing in science and technology, which is obviously very, very important. But just like Marek said, we're getting to the point that AI makes better AI. AI writes code like you would not believe. It doesn't debug because it doesn't need to. It's not tired, it's not upset, it doesn't have any crisis. It could work for 24 hours, it has infinite lifelong learnings. We only have one. We need to understand where we got AI and where it is in a state and where we could kind of fill the gap and actually make sure that AI will forever work alongside us. So in that sense, yes, science and technology, very, very important. Math, very, very important. Critical thinking, the ability to question, creativity, multidisciplinary, invaluable. We cannot pass on that.
Dr. Leong, when you look at applications of artificial intelligence in education, it's a field that we, for some reason, we're sort of dreading the aspects of artificial intelligence in so many ways, but it shows such promise here. What are some of the most important things that you've seen in terms of its potential to revolutionize education, particularly in less developed portions of the world?
I see that the most important use or applications, the contribution of AI to education would be to support lifelong learning. As we know, as society progresses and things change, a lot of the tasks and a lot of the skills we probably do not need anymore, like driving, okay? Then what about the job replacement? What happens to the doctors or the workers who perhaps the job is replaced by or is complemented by or augmented by artificial intelligence? What kind of new skills can he or she acquire and quickly? And I believe AI can play a role in this, becoming a lifelong mentor. For example, when a kid is young, it can personalize and customize the kind of training, the educational programs to help. But it doesn't mean that it's going to replace a human teacher or a mentor. But you'll probably be able to do monitoring, reminding, and getting resources to teach more effectively and for the child to learn more efficiently. And when it becomes an adult, after the formal education period is over, and how do we keep learning new skills and adapt to new changes and requirements using AI technology? And when they get old, when we lose some of our cognitive and physical capabilities, and the AI could also serve as a coach or assistant in getting through daily life activities and to live independently. And I think AI can play a good role. I do not think that we should fear the replacement of AI. It's become super AI, and to take away a lot of things that we like to do. But right now, I think AI is actually helping us to do a lot of the repetitive and complex tasks that is tedious and boring for us. And we will probably be able to do different things, a new set of things to make our lives better with AI technology.
Yeah, one of the interesting outcomes of the experiment in the US, the broad experiment with massive online learning communities, was that if you have a professor, a human professor, and they're spending their time lecturing, there's so much of that can be automated to create space for the professor to spend much more individualized time. So it can strip away a lot of the inefficiencies that today are very standard in education and create a new premium on the efficiency of human teachers. And a lot of the stuff that today we consider just standard problems with education actually begin to vanish. So another question from the audience. Do you have anybody? Oh, we're a little quiet today. Okay. Well, some of you are using Slido and GLOBSEC 2018. Here's one. What safeguards can we develop to avoid AI falling into wrong hands? I think like we've just gone through a gazillion of them. I feel like we're pretty good on some safeguards. We need to have international standards. They have to be broadly understood across stakeholders, including the public. I feel like we're doing well here. Which ones have we not touched on in terms of safeguards?
I feel like it's an important question to define what the wrong hands are. I mean, I think that there was some talk at some point during this forum about terrorists using AI, and I was a bit snarky about it because I said, you know what, you need so much talent and so much resources in order to use AI that I would be more suspicious of countries hurting each other, militaries kind of going against each other, than terrorist organizations silently becoming like a startup company. I think that we need to define what wrong hands are, because I think that just like you have technology or AI for good, when is AI not used for good? Is there like an evil mastermind that sits at home and says, I will use AI for bad today?
Right.
I feel like we need to kind of get a clearer grasp of what it is to wrong hands, what it is for good, what it is for bad. I think that a lot of people that develop AI don't think that it will be bad. They just think that they want to make more money or they want to make the service more efficient. There are unanticipated consequences to everything we do. And that is something that we're going to have to account for. But my question is, if the person who asked the question or if anyone else wants to say, what would you envision as wrong hands, so that maybe we could provide a better answer?
Classic horse race question. Which country will bring the most disruption to global economies through AI? Pick Singapore. No.
No, we can't do it alone.
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
I strongly believe that it is not going to be one country or one entity to make the greatest difference, because ultimately AI as a technology, all the basic algorithms and the advancements are actually open. Because they are all published in the research venues, the conferences. You see people, researchers, scientists from all over the world to be there to actually to discuss and to actually improve on the algorithms and each other will use. It's the translation of actually using how to embed those algorithms and put it into actual applications that will make a real world impact. This is where the values are created. And I think all the countries, when we're talking about looking at the AI race, the US, China, Singapore, and all over the world, they are bringing those applications and developing those applications in a collaborative manner or separately. Okay, so it's all going to create the value together. So I would think that it is a global achievement. When we're talking about the AI advancements, we will get from a lot of the companies, the large companies, they actually have regional offices and AI labs all over the world. So I do not think it is really the contribution of one single country or one single entity that will bring about disruption.
Anyone else want to try and name a country that's going to disrupt economies the most through its development and use of artificial intelligence?
I feel like I need to bring back the idea of importing technology, where we kind of see very strong hubs that develop the technology and a lot of markets taking them in. If you think about a good example of that is social media. What is your social media? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp. That's what your social media is. And I think that in that sense, that provided services that were very, very good and very affordable, because you don't pay a price, but you actually pay the ultimate price with your data. But you also don't have a viable alternative, because no network is going to be able to attract users right now, because everyone is using on that platform. You have the critical mass. I think that that kind of disruption that we already see with other technologies coming from countries that have very robust industries, I think that I'm concerned that we're going to see this kind of pattern emerge all over again. I think that right now, the two most robust economies that have already AI applications integrated into services are the US and China. And China was only able to do that because it blocked Western companies and was able to kind of generate alternatives that were able to scale up because China is gigantic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a almost direct correlation between Google's willingness to work with the Defense Department and their closing off of the Chinese market. Like, it goes like almost exactly like that. So let's return to our poll really quickly. 20 years from now, advances in artificial intelligence will make the world more secure. And it looks like we are even more pessimistic than we were the other day when we were talking with the generals. So I think that's a fascinating example of how much further we have to go in developing trust with this technology. Because we all take it as for granted an aspect of the future, a hugely influential one, and yet there's clearly a lot of suspicion surrounding it. So you all have your work cut out for you. Have you changed your minds at all about whether or not artificial intelligence will create better security or just greater prosperity in the world in the next 20 years? Or more importantly, what's your most important takeaway from this conversation about how to think about cooperation or competition in artificial intelligence? Anybody?
Well, I think that I became more optimistic about our ability to really create kind of a multi-polar world where you have competitors that you understand that are not necessarily as strong as you or have resources of you, but have innovations, have very creative planning, and have the ability to bring in kind of a additional output to enrich the outcome. So I am more positive about collaboration as quite possibly the only viable solution to a race.
I always believe that cooperation and collaboration is the way to go, but I also realize that there are a lot of situations where we need to bring the awareness of the limitations of the technologies, and we need to send that message more clearly, because it is not a solution that will solve all the problems, and we have to decide and define how we want to make use of the technologies, since a lot of it is a human decision. It's not driven by technology.
Yeah, I agree that I also am more optimistic than before, this discussion, and I think cooperation is better even for the actors, because the actors have to decide if they want to be cooperating and being part of a stronger community, or being on the other side, being these like wrong hand kind of guys, and having all disadvantages associated with that.
Okay, all right. Are there any more questions from the audience before we break? Because we're just about at time. There we go. Oh, wait, please grab the microphone. There we go.
This may sound like a stupid question, but I hope it's not. But I wonder if AI will one day help us resolve world conflicts, like Arab-Israeli conflicts, the Korean Peninsula nuclear crisis. Is that a possibility?
I think, well, I'm from Israel, so that conflict has been going on for a while. I think that AI could contribute in the sense that it could perhaps, if we do actually create artificial intelligence that thinks and has the intelligence that is complementary to human beings, not just kind of extended intelligence, I think that our possibilities will expand. And we will see much more creativity in the way that we think about these kind of conflicts. I will say one thing, and I'm sorry to be pessimistic, but a lot of these conflicts revolve around power. It's not necessarily land, it's not necessarily religion, it's about power. The Arab-Israeli conflict generates a lot of money. It's a fact. And it basically incentivizes the actors to continue engaging in that conflict because they make a lot of money out of it. And it gives them a lot of power. So in that sense, unless you find a way to tackle that and go directly to the source, I think it would be a good advising or a kind of a good advisor. I'm not sure that people would be willing to relinquish that power. And I think that if we were ever to solve that conflict or conflicts like that, because I think that's a characteristic of every conflict, we would need to really tackle the source.
If I may add to that, I think one of the root causes is inequality, social and economic equality that lead to a lot of the conflicts and destructions in the world. And if AI can contribute to solving some of these problems and inequality, I think it would make a contribution. But ultimately, it's a human problem. AI is only a tool that will probably help us solve the problem in a more effective way.
I like her answer better.
Yeah, that's that question of what exactly is security, and if it's creating resource availability, creating opportunities in education, creating opportunities for GDP growth and economic growth broadly, then you have actual security. So with that, I wanted to remind everybody that at 11 o'clock, In the Danube space, there's a session, Terrorism, Not Bad for Business. And in this space, Maria Teresa, the session is Explosive Data, Cyber Threats to Democracy. Thank you so much for being here. Please help me in thanking our panel. Thank you.
Thank you.